There's a moment in every marriage when you realize you're not fighting for your relationship anymore. You're just fighting for him to notice you're drowning. My name is Emma, and I'm here to tell you about a woman named Catherine who learned this lesson far too late. Catherine made one devastating mistake. She threatened to leave thinking it would wake her husband up. Instead, it handed him the exit door he'd apparently been waiting for all along. This is the story of how one woman's cry for help became the catalyst for everything falling apart. And trust me, the ending is not what she expected. Catherine was 37 years old, and she was living what looked like a dream from the outside. 10 years of marriage, 2 beautiful sons, 8 and 5 years old. A husband who went to work every day in his pressed suits and polished shoes while she stayed home, managing the household, raising the children, keeping the family machine running. This was their arrangement. It was supposed to be the perfect trade-off. Catherine had given up her career, her independence, her professional identity to nurture their family. Harold, her husband, had built his life around work. They were partners in theory, each playing their designated role. But here's what nobody tells you about being a stay-at-home parent. It's not the beautiful, fulfilling experience everyone romanticizes. Sure, Catherine loved her children desperately. She would have moved mountains for them. But loving your kids and actually enjoying every minute of your day are two completely different things. During the school hours, when both boys were in class, Catherine found herself staring at the walls of her home. The silence was suffocating sometimes. She'd watch other women post pictures of their professional lives, the accomplishments, the meetings, the sense of purpose, and she'd feel something inside her shrivel up a little more each time. Her days blended into each other. Wake up, make breakfast, send the kids to school, wait, pick them up, do homework, make dinner, repeat. There was no newness, no achievement. No one handing her a paycheck and saying good job. Just the endless cycle of maintaining a household that nobody seemed to really notice or appreciate. So Catherine started sleeping in. If she didn't have to be anywhere at a specific time, if there were no pressing appointments or deadlines, why force herself awake at sunrise? Harold was already up. He'd take care of the morning routine with the boys. He seemed to have it figured out. They'd all get to school just fine without her standing there in her pajamas, getting in the way. She told herself this was practical, efficient even, but deep down she knew it was something else. It was withdrawal. A quiet protest against a life that had slowly started to feel like suffocation. The same thing happened with the evenings. Harold would come home from work, and without Catherine even asking, he'd automatically slip into the bedtime routine. He'd help the boys with their baths, read them stories, tuck them into bed, check on them one more time before they fell asleep. It was this beautiful ritual between father and sons, and Catherine justified staying on the couch, phone in hand, eyes glued to her screen, by telling herself that he was bonding with them. And maybe he was. But the truth was more complicated. The truth was that Catherine had stopped trying. She'd stopped putting in effort because effort seemed pointless when nothing she did seemed to matter anyway. Weekends were no different. Harold would wake with the boys on Saturday mornings while Catherine slept in. He'd take them to their sports activities, to the park, to whatever adventure they were supposed to have that day. The boys would ask if Mommy wanted to come, and Catherine would say she was tired, that she needed to rest. That was her right, wasn't it? Weekends were supposed to be for recharging. But with every no, with every time she chose sleep over presence, she was doing something she didn't fully understand yet. She was building a wall between herself and her family. And worse, she was building resentment. It started slowly. Harold began to change. Not in some dramatic way that Catherine could point to and say, there. That's when everything shifted. It was subtle, like watching a candle burn down so gradually that you don't realize it's almost gone until it's gone. He stopped talking to her about his day. Catherine would ask him how work was, and she'd get these clipped one-word answers that felt like he was swatting away her questions like annoying flies. He'd come home from work, help with the kids, and then disappear into his office. Or he'd claim he was tired and go to bed early. The easy conversation they used to have, the small talk, the check-ins, the ordinary sharing that holds a marriage together, all of it just evaporated. Then came the questions. Harold would ask Catherine things like, "Where did you go today? Who did you talk to? What did you do?" At first, she thought he was just making conversation. trying to connect with her life the way husbands sometimes do. But the questions kept coming, and they started to feel like an interrogation. Like he didn't quite believe she was doing what she said she was doing. Catherine found it invasive, controlling even. She would fire the same questions back at him. Who did you talk to at work? Where did you go for lunch? Who was in that meeting? And suddenly, Harold would get defensive. He'd change the subject or tell her she was being ridiculous. Double standards, Catherine thought. He can ask about my day, but I can't ask about his? The tension in their home was becoming palpable. The boys could feel it. Catherine could see it in the way they'd grow quiet when Harold came home, as if they were sensing the distance between their parents even though nobody was saying anything out loud. Catherine tried to bridge the gap. She'd attempt conversations about what was wrong, about why Harold seemed so distant, so cold. And his response was always the same. Nothing's wrong, everything's fine. Classic deflection, classic avoidance. But everything wasn't fine. The atmosphere in their home had transformed. What used to feel like a sanctuary now felt like a place where Catherine was constantly walking on eggshells, trying not to upset Harold's moods, trying not to trigger his coldness. She kept thinking, if Harold was unhappy about something, why didn't he just say it? If there were problems with how she was handling things, why didn't he communicate that directly instead of letting it build up into this suffocating silence? Catherine didn't realize that her withdrawal, the sleeping in, the lack of engagement, the phone scrolling through the evenings, might have been sending its own message. She was too focused on what Harold wasn't giving her to see what she had stopped giving him. The first time Catherine threatened to leave wasn't really a threat. Not in her mind, anyway. It was more like a desperate flare gun shot into the darkness, a plea for someone, anyone, to acknowledge that their marriage was in crisis. It happened during an argument about Harold's parents. They were planning to visit, and they'd assumed they'd stay at Catherine and Harold's house like they always did. Catherine didn't feel up to it. The hosting, the pressure, the performance. She was already exhausted, already struggling with the emotional distance between her and Harold. The last thing she needed was to be the perfect daughter-in-law for a week while her marriage was silently falling apart. So Catherine told Harold, "I need your parents to stay at a hotel." Harold refused. They'd already made plans. It would be rude to change things now. His parents were expecting to stay with them. End of story. That's when Catherine lost it. In frustration and hurt, she said words she thought would shake him awake. "If you care more about your parents' comfort than your own wife's well-being, then maybe we have bigger problems than just a visit. Maybe I should just leave. Maybe I should pack my things and go." She was waiting for the reaction. She was waiting for Harold to suddenly see how serious things had become, to realize that his wife was in pain, that their marriage was fracturing. She was waiting for him to fight for her, to fight for them. Instead, Harold stared at her with these hollow eyes, and he simply said, "Okay, they can get a hotel room." But the way he said it, cold, detached, as if he was doing her a favor he resented. Something inside Catherine broke. This wasn't how it used to work. In their early years, when they'd fight, they'd both get heated. They'd raise their voices. They'd eventually come together, find their way back to each other. It was emotional and messy and human. But this wasn't a fight. This was a man checking out of a conflict because he didn't have the energy to engage anymore. After that night, Catherine noticed how Harold would shut down whenever she tried to discuss their relationship. If she said she felt disconnected from him, he'd just nod and say okay, without offering any solutions. If she mentioned that she felt like they were drifting apart, he'd agree, but wouldn't suggest anything they could do to fix it. So Catherine started bringing up the possibility of separation, not because she wanted a divorce, but because she needed him to understand how desperate things had become. She needed him to see that they were standing at the edge of a cliff, and if they didn't do something, they were both going to fall. Every time she mentioned it, she was really saying, "Please, Harold, please tell me you don't want this. Please tell me you want to save us. Please tell me I matter to you." But Harold's responses became stranger and stranger. Instead of fighting to keep his marriage alive, instead of saying, "No, absolutely not, I'm not losing you," he would just get quiet. Sometimes he'd even agree that maybe they weren't compatible anymore. Who agrees with that? who hears their wife talking about separation and just accepts it? Catherine kept thinking that eventually he'd snap out of it, that he'd realize what he was doing to their family and step up. She kept giving him opportunities to choose her, to choose them. Every time she brought up her unhappiness, every time she mentioned that maybe they'd be better off apart, she was really begging him to prove that their marriage mattered to him, but he never did. The moment that changed everything came when Catherine told their oldest son about the divorce. Looking back, Catherine knows how bad it sounds. But in that moment, she was drowning, and she needed someone to understand what she was going through. When her 8-year-old asked why Mommy and Daddy were acting weird, Catherine told him the truth, that sometimes grown-ups have problems they can't fix, and sometimes that means families change. Harold absolutely lost it when he found out. He said Catherine had no right to involve the children in their problems, that she was being selfish and destructive. The irony, Catherine thought bitterly, was that Harold was the one who'd been emotionally abandoning their family for months. Where was his outrage about that? Catherine fired back that the kids weren't stupid. They could sense the tension. They could feel the collapse happening around them. And if Harold had actually tried to work on their marriage instead of giving up on it, they wouldn't be in this position. That's when Catherine said the words that would define her future. "I'm done with your indifference. I'm done feeling like I'm the only one who cares about saving our family. If you want to act like our marriage doesn't matter, then maybe it doesn't. Maybe we should just get separated." She was hoping, God, she was praying, that this would finally wake him up. That he'd look at her with panic in his eyes and say, "No, no, I don't want this. Let's fight for us." Instead, Harold looked at her with this calm, almost relieved expression. And he said, "You're right, we should separate." Just like that. 10 years of history. 2 beautiful children they'd created together. A whole life built brick by brick, decision by decision, year by year. And it was gone. Dismissed. Like he'd been waiting for permission to leave all along. The next morning, Catherine woke up expecting him to have had second thoughts. She imagined he'd spent the night tossing and turning, finally realizing what he was about to lose. She thought today would be the day he fought for her. Instead, she found Harold in the kitchen making breakfast for the boys like it was any other Tuesday. He was humming. Actually humming. Casual, unbothered, at peace. When Catherine tried to talk to him about it, expecting him to say he'd changed his mind, Harold just looked at her and said, "I think you're right. We should move forward with the separation. I've already talked to a lawyer." A lawyer. He'd already talked to a lawyer while Catherine had been home trying to figure out how to save their marriage. While she'd been lying in bed at night praying for a way to fix things. While she'd been desperate to find a solution, Harold had been planning his exit strategy. That's when the full weight of it hit Catherine. He hadn't been pushed into this by her desperation. He'd been waiting for it. Her threat to leave hadn't forced his hand. It had simply given him the perfect excuse to do something he'd already decided to do. What followed were the hardest months of Catherine's life. She watched as her husband moved through the separation with a calmness that terrified her. The custody arrangements, the legal documents, the division of assets. He agreed to most of what she asked for without argument, which should have felt like a victory. Instead, it felt like he couldn't wait to finalize everything and close this chapter for good. Meanwhile, Catherine fell apart. She'd call him at work crying, trying to explain that she hadn't meant what she said, that she was just frustrated and hurt and desperate for him to fight for them. Harold would listen patiently and then calmly explain that he thought the separation was for the best. For the best? How could breaking up their family possibly be for the best? She showed up at his office one day, hoping that a face-to-face conversation would reach him, would make him see what they were losing. Instead, she was met with his coworkers' pitying looks and Harold's embarrassment. He walked her to the parking lot and very calmly explained that he'd be moving out within the month. And he did. He left. He took an apartment across town and began building a new life while Catherine was left picking up the pieces. The boys kept asking when Daddy was coming home. They wanted to know if they'd done something wrong. They needed reassurance that their father's absence wasn't somehow their fault. Catherine had to be strong for them while her own world was collapsing. But Harold seemed fine. Better than fine, actually. When he came to pick up the boys for his scheduled time, he looked content, genuinely happy. He'd take them out for fun activities, and they'd come back talking about what a great time they'd had with Dad. It was like he'd compartmentalized his entire life. Work in one box, dad duties in another. His new life in a third. And none of them seemed to touch each other or cause him any real distress. Catherine couldn't compartmentalize. She was living in the wreckage, trying to explain to her children why their family had shattered, dealing with lawyers and paperwork, and the overwhelming responsibility of being suddenly responsible for everything on her own. For the first time in years, she had to work full-time. She had to manage household budgets. She had to handle repairs and maintenance and all the things that Harold used to manage. And she realized, with a painful clarity, just how much he had been carrying, just how much she had been leaning on him without even realizing it. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, Catherine saw Harold at their son's soccer game with a woman she'd never seen before. Her name was Sarah. She was pretty in an understated way, probably around Catherine's age, with this natural confidence that Catherine had always envied in other women. She was cheering for both boys like they were her own children. She was laughing at something Harold said while keeping her eyes on the field. She was warm and genuine, and everything that suddenly made Catherine understand why her husband had been so willing to walk away. And Harold? God, Harold looked happy. Really, genuinely happy in a way Catherine hadn't seen in years. He had his arm around Sarah's shoulders. He was smiling. He was at ease in a way he'd never been during the last few years of their marriage. It would have been easier to hate Sarah if she'd been awful or territorial or rude. But she was just nice. Genuinely, kindly nice. She even asked Catherine if she wanted to grab coffee sometime to discuss coordinating schedules. She treated Catherine like any other co-parent, without awkwardness or competitiveness. Catherine found out later that Sarah was a teacher at the boys' school, that she and Harold had started talking during pickup times and slowly developed a friendship that became something more. Sarah had been divorced for a couple of years herself and had a daughter around the boys' age. And watching them together, watching how easily they moved through the world as a couple, Catherine realized with a crushing finality that Harold had the capacity to be present, affectionate, and engaged. He just hadn't wanted to be that way with Catherine anymore. So here's what Catherine wants you to know. She's the one who ended up alone, working a job she hates, watching her ex-husband live his best life with a woman who somehow unlocked a version of him that Catherine never could. Everyone tells her she should be happy for him, for their children's sake, that she should focus on moving forward and building a new life. But Catherine isn't there yet. She's still bitter. She's still resentful. She's still trying to understand how 10 years of marriage and 2 beautiful children could matter so little. If you're in a marriage right now and you're feeling disconnected, please hear this. Don't wait for the crisis. Don't make threats you don't mean, hoping your partner will suddenly see your pain. Sometimes they will. Sometimes they won't. But the real tragedy is that Catherine will never know if her marriage could have been saved because she never asked for help. She never said the words directly. She just threatened to leave instead. Thank you for listening to Catherine's story here on the Mrs. Emma channel. If this resonated with you, if you found yourself in a similar situation, or you know someone who has, please like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe to stay updated with more real, raw, human stories that remind us all why communication and honesty matter so much in the relationships we've built our lives around. This is Emma, reminding you that sometimes the person we need to fight for most is ourselves. Take care of you.